welcome to Church Sound Podcast. I'm your host, Samantha. I'm an audio engineer and an editor with ProSound Web, as well as a lead instructor for Church Sound University. On this episode, I'm actually going to be bringing you a House of Worship experts panel that Sound Girls hosted this past Saturday. So let me give a quick shout out to this show's sponsors, K-Array, whose loudspeaker solutions can be found at k-array.com. And I also want to thank Digico. Their new Quantum 338 and other House of Worship solutions are available at digico.biz. Okay, be sure to check out Sound Girls if you haven't heard about them, and enjoy the show. Welcome, everybody. Hello, Facebook. Hello, Zoom people. It is excellent to see you guys. I'm going to hide all of the non-video participants from myself, so I can just see the excellent people with their cams on. But welcome. This is the Ask the Experts panel with Sound Girls. This is the House of Worship specific one, and I've got quite a group of experts here joining me today, and I'm going to let them tell you a little bit about themselves. So let's see who's going to go first. Let's do Becky. Let's hit you first.
I knew you were going to do that.
You didn't know.
I thought you was going to choose me.
Becky, who are you?
I'm Becky Campbell, owner of B4 Media Production, and also a touring engineer and front of house for a few churches, as well as I train a lot of churches. So there we go.
Yeah, and you've done quite a bit of production management or direction inside of the church as well, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, you've done a little bit of everything. We've recently spoken about that. So
installs and all sorts of things.
All sorts of stuff. All right. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, next, Isaac, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Isaac Marino, born and raised in church, so kind of started doing production from that point. But I'm currently a touring engineer, studio owner, and basically help churches in my community. So.
And his community is my community, as
Yes.
we live not far from each other. So that's
awesome.
Always good to have you. And thank you very much. Okay, so Golden.
Hey, everyone. I'm Golden Preciado. I'm down here in Costa Mesa, California. I'm the House of Worship Specialist for QSC. And I am currently running sound at my church. And I also work at Campus Jacks, which is a music venue here in Newport Beach, California. I run sounds for bands about 5 to 6 nights a week. So keeping busy.
Yeah. Okay. And finally, I guess I'll go last. I guess I should have gone first, but oh well. Brian.
I think my story is similar to Isaac's in that I basically started doing sound in my church when I was, I don't know, 10 or something. And it was, the teeny tiny church and the little 4-channel, like realistic mixer with the black plastic knobs, and nobody knew how to make the microphone work. So they were like, let's get the geeky little kid to try. And so, I came up in doing that in churches, and but the majority of my career has been in the secular market, and I've freelanced for many years, and I've done lots of music things and lots of corporate things and lots of other things. I did work for a church for 7 years full time as the creative arts director, which oversaw the tech department and all those things. But I've had this passion for church audio because of my direct involvement as a volunteer, and also just because that's where I came from. That's my roots. That's my club scene, if you will. So that's where my background is.
Very cool. And I'm Samantha. I'm an editor and author over at ProSound Web. I've been heavily involved in Sound Girls since 2013, I believe. But I'm also with the Allen and Heath US team. I oversee our commercial and install endeavors. And I also host a podcast called Church Sound Podcast, as well as do a lot of education for the House of Worship market. And much like many of our panelists today, I've spent a good portion of my career engaged with and deeply inside of the House of Worship segment of Pro Audio. And so there's a special place in my heart for it. And so it's just kind of followed me, even though I'm doing so many other things like our panelists. that always like kind of stays with you? Is that house of worship that just kind of becomes a part of you? You take it with you to other jobs, and you just kind of always have that piece of you. So
Agreed.
okay.
Yep.
We've heard a little bit about kind of what you guys are currently doing, but I'd love to hear a little bit about, Brian, you had mentioned it. You had worked at a church for about 7 years. How long you guys have worked inside of houses of worship, churches, synagogues, anything like that, mosques, and what different kinds of positions you've held before. So if anybody wants to raise their hand and go first, I'll we'll go backwards. Okay, so Golden. How long have you worked inside of house of worship, and what sorts of positions have you had?
Well, I actually grew up in church. So that has been my background. And my dad has been in the business for many, many years, and he's just recently retired. But I grew up working for him, even as a little girl. And I had no interest really in making anything of being an audio engineer in the beginning. I wanted to be a musician. I wanted to be all the persons that my dad was mixing. So that's what I pursued for a long time. And even in church, leading worship. And my husband and I traveled all over the United States with Campus Crusade for Christ, and then on our own. And we've played all over the world, doing our original music and worship music. And then we started having kids, and we had 4, like pretty fast, because I had my daughter. And then 16 months later, I had twins. And then 5 years after that, I had another one. So we had our kids pretty quickly. And it came to a point where I discovered we probably weren't going to make a very solid living continuing doing music. So I jumped back to my roots with audio. And I remember I was at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, which is my home church that I grew up in, and asking the sound director over there about doing live sound there and running broadcast and all. And he was just so floored why I would want to do that, because everybody knew me as a musician. They had no idea, that why I would even want to do sound. But he knew my background and my pedigree and working for my dad and all. So he decided to take a chance and bring me on. And I remember him coming up to the booth and listening to my mix during one of my first Sundays out. And he goes, "Wow, I guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." And the funny thing is I hadn't been like at front of house mixing all that much before that, because I was always the one up on stage. But that was when I really cut my teeth into full-time engineering, broke my teeth on an SD8 and 9 Digicos. For a first digital board, that was like quite an entry. But I discovered the awesome flexibility that digital boards offered, and it was heaven from there on out. So that's my background in house of worship. I'm currently working at Grace Fellowship, which is a smaller church, probably about 500 or so, which I am loving, because I'm able to do my work with QSC and Campus Jacks and sustain that. And I only come in on Sunday now and run sound. And I do train volunteers on Sundays as we go. So that has been an awesome place for me right now.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about training and working with teams and all sorts of stuff here in a little bit. But that's great. Isaac, I know because you and I have worked together before, you do mostly front of house, if I'm not mistaken, sprinkling of monitors, as well as some other stuff outside of house.
Well, a little bit. I mean, ever since we upgraded to the D Live console, we gave the monitor mixing to the musicians with their ME units. So, but yeah, currently, working for a church. I was on the road for a while, and being a husband and a dad, I kind of felt that I needed to get off the road for a bit and be husband and be dad. And God kind of stuck me in this position to work at this church, and it's been great. I love it. I love the community. I love even in the city that we work in, Kansas City, I think it's great. There's a lot of opportunity for all of us there to work. Golden, you said Costa Mesa, Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa.
Yes.
I
Yes.
actually was in a hip hop group, and we performed at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa.
Did I run sound for you?
I was born and raised in Southern California, and so I'm
Nice.
from this area. But I was in a hip hop group, and I remember performing at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. That's kind of funny.
That's so cool. Yeah, yeah, that's awesome.
But I got out of being a performer, kind of the same thing. But for me, the performance thing was, I didn't like the bickering or the fighting, or who was going to be the forefront. So I was like, you know what, I want to be the guy that just pushes the buttons. But that's kind of where, the real passion kind of jumped in. Even though growing up, my dad always had a recording studio in the house. So that's kind of how I learned, was by pushing buttons and twisting knobs and all that type of stuff. But the final decision was really, I don't want to be in a band. I'll just be the guy back here. I'll put it all together. But it's what an amazing opportunity we get to be a part of our communities and a group of faith, and be able just to help people. So, and I forgot the question.
No, different kinds of positions you've held. I just know you're
different types. Okay. So yeah, positions I've held, production manager, taking care of everything for, from concept of the worship service, set design, builds, lighting, all that kind of stuff, as well as, but my favorite part was always doing audio. I'll jump into anything. I'll take care of video production, but my sweet spot is audio.
Yeah, I think that will maybe be a little bit of a topic that comes up again, like a theme in this conversation, is that it's not very often you just do one thing. Like, oh, I've only ever done front of house and I've never touched anything else. Like Becky, I know that you jumped like from one position to another. Lord knows we all have. But yeah, you tell us a little bit about the different kinds of positions you've held.
I started off in church as a tech, following the tech director around, and a lot of people called me his puppy dog for a while. I had a few nicknames for that, and then I was also in a hip hop group. Just kidding. I would love to have been in a hip hop group. So I was a tech for a couple of years, and then jumped straight from there to running front of house, and then tech directing in like 2 weeks after that. They were like, "Oh, you can run front of house too. That means you can be in charge of everything." Then tried my hand at lighting, which sucked, and learned that I needed some people that could do that a lot better than me. And then video. I've fallen into a lot of video in the last year, which I think a bunch of us have. And streaming and everything, ProPresenter and all that wonderful stuff. So yeah, I've pretty much done all of that and held the tech director title, usually while I'm operating one of the other.
Yeah, tech director is just a good role for just like a catch-all of like this overarching individual that's in charge of stuff, and they just take care of everything technical as it relates to worship. And that is a lot of stuff. So because especially for those of you that are listening, who are kind of interested in or just starting, like maybe you volunteer at your church and kind of want to see what the possibilities are, like learning a little bit of everything is kind of almost just part of the game. Like it not only just makes you really valuable, but it's really good to be well-rounded and have that skill set, because it's very often that we're either, maybe a little bit low on staff, or we're having trouble recruiting volunteers. Like you just may not, or, goodness, somebody gets sick Sunday morning and you may need to cover. Being able to run ProPresenter is like that's pretty easy. Like once you get started with that, but like everybody always needs a ProPresenter runner. Running graphics is just like a thing. And it's way less complicated than starting to get into like video control and joysticks, which are a blast, but it's a whole thing. So learning all these different skills helps a lot. And so tech directing is just one of those jobs. That's a really big church title in positions. So and Brian, what about you? You're on the East Coast as well as Becky is. But
Uh,
what have you?
What we like to call the Beast Coast, because
Okay.
the West Coast gets that whole rhyming thing that sounds better, so we go with the Beast Coast. Like everybody that's been involved in churches, I've worn just about every hat, and I think. I know this is implicit in your question, but a lot of times people also tend to discount, oh, but I was just a volunteer when I did this, whatever, fill in the blank. But, I actually got paid to do this. And then they somehow like elevate, like I got paid over here. So then that's therefore something I've actually done. And the reality is, and anyone who's worked in and around churches for any length of time knows that it all runs on volunteers and the volunteer talents and abilities. And so, I did have about a 7-year run where I worked full time at a church, and I was the creative arts director, which basically meant I was in charge of everything, which is just an awesome, wonderful thing.
Did that include the music too? Because creative arts.
Yes, it did. So I was the music director, which meant I was on stage every single week as the music director and the worship leader quite often, and directing the entire music team and playing 3 or 4 instruments on stage and doing all the music arrangements. And I was also in charge of the entire tech team. And I was also in charge of the entire drama team. And I was in charge. I could just keep going and going. The thing is, it was without a doubt one of the most like fulfilling times of my life, because you very quickly realize there's absolutely no way I can do all this. So then you are forced to find people with an interest in things and then empower them to learn how to do it better than you can do it. Mm-hmm. And that was the really like rewarding part of the job for me. I mean, I enjoyed playing music. I had fantastic musicians playing with me and fantastic singers, and we had that whole onstage thing is fun and it's great. But really, ultimately, when I think back on those times, I think about my pro presenter team that started with 2 women who didn't even know how to turn a computer on. And by the time, a year later, like they were basically showing me, oh, here's this background, this shortcut trick, and we can do this cool thing, and I can do these like semi-opaque lower thirds that trail off into like and all this kind of cool stuff. And knowing that you're able to empower people to do these kinds of things, that's the reward. All the tech parts are fun, and the problem solving is fun, but being able to build into people and have them show you how things can be done far better than you even know how to do them. That was the reward for me. I didn't really answer the question, but I kind of did.
No, you totally did.
But maybe I set us up for another question. I don't know.
No, you're just go. Yes, I know you at this point, right? I see where your mind's going, and I'm going to go with. We'll go together. No, absolutely. That's an excellent point. Is that, and I really, really want to stress this to people. Like, there's something particularly fulfilling about working in houses of worship and getting to be around all this tech, yes, but getting to be around all of these people where that every single person is there because they want to be there. And it's like such a team spirit. Like, we're all trying to go in the same direction. And there's something really significant about that. Like, nobody goes to church because they hate everyone and this is only a paycheck to them, because I guarantee you it's not. I just guarantee you it isn't. And there's something, it's just so like refreshing and nice. And you actually kind of get used to that. And at the time when I was doing 90% house of worship work, when I would switch back to doing like secular world things, it would almost be like a culture shock, because people had such different attitudes or such different like work ethics than they did when we were inside the church. It was really interesting to see it. I miss part of that, working more in the secular world now. But that, I really want to stress that, like, there's something very, very special about working in the house of worship sector of this market. And I'm sure you guys have felt that as well.
I just want to add to that. I mean, even the fact that, like, for me, I got to work with a lot of the youth kids. You start developing some of the youth. You're like, hey, you got some tech savviness. Why don't you try this or give this a shot? And a lot of the kids that I brought up underneath me ended up going to school for film. If I taught them some video production stuff, they ended up going to school for film. Someone, to school for music. And to be a part of their lives, even in that aspect, where you can mentor somebody to move into maybe a career in this area. I mean, for me, it was extremely fulfilling.
Yeah, and I love that as I've been in church, how I developed a family. I have my immediate family, and then I have my church family, and they're all so super special and so close. That's one thing I love about being able to be running sound in church. And I hope that God affords me this opportunity forever.
Yeah, absolutely. I've held a lot of different positions inside of houses of worship, and I did a lot of my teeth cutting inside of the space, and being able to teach people and being able to kind of grow in that sense, and that idea of family golden. When I left my last house of worship gig, it was for a very large church in the area, and I was there for 7 years, and we were truly a part of my family. A lot of them were at my wedding and were with me through huge milestones in my life as I grew into adulthood even. And I will have those special bonds with them for the rest of my life. I'll never have those kinds of connections with other people. There's just something about it, you guys. There's just that weird sense of community, and it's not necessarily, it's partially because when you go on tour and you do this other stuff, you do have a similar sense of that. We've all suffered through this together. And so because of that, we've grown together in brother and sisterhood. But it's a little bit different suffering, or a little less suffering, maybe. The struggles that you deal with in houses of worship are different. It's not necessarily you're up, you sleep 4 hours a night necessarily, unless it's Christmas or Easter time, in which case those are the Super Bowls of their events.
Well, I find that since we're working with the same people on a regular basis, that we are learning how to work together and going through growing pains. And when we are able to learn that and we make milestones in our relationships, it's super rewarding. And that's how we get close as a family and as a church family.
Yeah, absolutely. And with being with the same musicians every week, you really get to know them and understand them. Even if they swap out every other week, or the services are different, you're still getting exposed to different variables, but you have such a sense of so much more control than you get in any other sector of pro audio. If you were on tour, you're working with the same musicians, but the venue changes every day or every couple of days. With house of worship work, it's the similar people with the same tech in the same room every week. And so you can really get things dialed in, and then you can start experimenting and getting weird with stuff, which is a lot of fun.
That's the part I like.
Go into church tech. It's where you can be weird with stuff. It'll be great. We should all do it. Get weird with stuff.
Put that on a t-shirt.
There you go.
Okay.
As each volunteer jumps on, you give them a shirt that says that.
Yes,
that works.
Oh yeah. So we were talking about volunteers a little bit, and now we're kind of joking about it some. But working with volunteers, teaching them and training, how have you guys found that? Whether it's from if you've ever been the volunteer, or if you're the person training volunteers, how do you guys normally kind of walk into that?
Scared out of my mind.
Just same way we're walking into this question. Apparently terrified to actually speak. Face first. I actually, I find working with volunteers to be amazing and awesome and wonderful. And here's the thing. They did this voluntarily. Right off the top, the whole dynamic is different than most situations where you may be training or working with a less experienced person. Right out of the box, they did this voluntarily. So there's already a willingness for them to work with you and to follow you. But they can also just as easily voluntarily leave. It's they also don't have the same sort of hold. We don't have the same hold over them that we might have if we were giving them a paycheck. It's a completely different dynamic. And the thing that I really love about it is you end up then with two sides that are kind of both working towards the same goal, which is I want my volunteer to be comfortable and feel successful and feel empowered and feel happy. And as a byproduct, I want them to do a good job because I know that's going to come from the other stuff. But the end result is not the most important thing to me because I'm working with somebody who's here voluntarily. I can't just beat them over the head and say, be excellent, or I'll get somebody who is excellent. Like, I need to work within the confines of who they are as a person, what their personality is, what are what kind of things do they need? What's the feedback that they need? Do they need me to tell them every single week that they did a great job, or is that going to annoy them? Like, I mean, it requires so much deeper of a relationship between people. And that's, to me, is the exciting part. It's to me, it's like every time I'm confronted with a new volunteer, it's okay, this is a new, amazing human secret puzzle that I get to help unlock. What's inside this person? Yeah. Like, they came forward and they said, I'm willing to run a camera. And I mean, I'm thinking of a specific person in my mind who turned out to be the best bass player I had ever seen in my life, who came forward as, I'm willing to run a camera. But I had to find that other person because it took years for me to even tease out of him that, oh, by the way, I play an instrument. And then, and so unlocking those things. And I've had, just the same things in other directions of people who came forward and said, I'm willing to help run cables on the stage. And, they end up being your monitor engineer, or they end up being the director of your entire video department or whatever, because you're able to tease out of them these gifts that they have. And like, that's just super exciting for me.
Yeah, you pointed on something that in the beginning of when you were talking, that the more challenging thing, getting volunteers isn't a problem. Okay, the pastor or ministry leader gets up on stage and says, hey, we need volunteers. Who wants to volunteer? We need help in audio. And some unsuspecting person raises their hand and says, I'll do it. And they assure them that they will tell them which buttons to push and which faders to turn up. And they get out there for their first time, they push up the fader, the whole system flies into feedback. And they realize that there is something to being an audio volunteer that they just didn't realize. There's a science behind this thing. But the fact of the matter is 90% of churches utilize volunteers within their congregation to some capacity for their audio and visual needs. And the thing we have to realize is that volunteering in our church is not only about helping with the operational needs of the ministry, it's also about enriching the whole community and building lifelong friendships. So serving as a volunteer can be one of the most fulfilling experiences. And for the AV leader, this means that I have some things that I need to do. And it takes perseverance, and it means training them. It means doing team building projects with them, spending some personal time with them, take them to coffee, learn about who they are as a person. They want to be valued and known as a person, not just an operator. And the whole thing with teaching new skills, that is also part of building the relationships, because you're going to be with that person every Sunday. And does it take perseverance? It most certainly does. Would it have been a lot easier to do it myself? Absolutely. Will I miss out on the awesome relationship that, I could have had if I didn't let this person get trained? Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's, a big part of my live sound career, got started in House of Worship because I volunteered. I learned broadcast mixing because I volunteered. I got to work on really high class, boutique boards because I volunteered. And I know some people are against starting their career working for free or what have you, but to a certain extent, you do have to pay your dues in this industry, even if it is in houses of worship. But I feel like you get, flatly, you get so much board time in a house of worship. If that's what you're really searching for, is some board time, go to a church. I bet you they need help anyway. Go get some board time. So.
Oh, absolutely. There's, one of the things when I was working at a church and was directing, that I used to throw out there, and I had a bunch of people take advantage of this. The whole band was on in-ears. We were, we had sort of an older version of basically, the Alan Heath ME1 system or whatever. Basically we all mixed our own in-ears. We all had our own. So we were kind of self-contained, and, coming from an audio background, like I basically had all the bits dialed in. So people came in, plugged in, gain structure was done, monitors worked, turn, twist, 5 minutes, sound check, and we're off and rolling. So I would invite pretty much anybody who wanted to do it to come out while we're rehearsing and do whatever you want at the front of house console. I don't care. But push things up, and I don't even care if it goes into feedback. You'll figure it out in a couple minutes. We'll survive. You probably won't, because you're just dealing with front of house anyway. But it's we might play through a song and a half where all I hear is subwoofer. And it's, but, you're getting a chance to learn these things. And several of those people who kind of came through that, oh yeah, I just want to play with it. I just want to, then we're like, oh, I want to learn a few more things. And then I paired them up with somebody who could mentor them and, bring them in and actually have them come in during the service and mix and get a little bit more into the nuts and bolts. But it was a perfect opportunity. We did the same thing with camera people. It was just come to a rehearsal, and we're just going to play with shots, and we're going to do stuff, and we're going to let you mess up and learn how to do focus and do all this stuff. And there's no pressure. It's like this is a perfect place to learn it. And yeah, some of those people ended up going on to professional careers. Others just learned to fit and serve in a role in a church and feel valuable, that they could contribute something to their local community that was unique and special. Yeah. What do? I run camera number 1 every other Sunday. And it was this is my thing that I know how to do. And a lot of people don't know how to do it. And I'm camera number 1, and I do it every other Sunday. And there you go. And, there's this value that they would get in it. But yeah, I mean, it is a great place to, kind of start from nothing and build up. And, especially if you have good leadership and you have good tech directors, and boy, does the church need more great tech directors. Where you can go, there's really kind of no limit.
Yeah, I liked your point. It's a great place to make mistakes. It's a lot more of a forgiving area than if you went and cut your teeth in corporate. Yeah, right. And I know Becky can really speak on that.
Yeah, there's no room for error in corporate whatsoever. You're done. You got feedback when they hit the podium, you're done, and someone else will get the job next time. No problem at all. They have the money to do that, so that's where that lands. But I want to jump on Brian's comment here about rehearsals. What a great way to cut your teeth. What an awesome place. It's like being back in school. You get to push all the buttons, you get to play with all the things, you get to do all the weird effects and whatever you want to try, oh, I've never tried compression. Go for it. Let's see what it sounds like. Can you hear it? Is this what a great place. I mean, when you're out doing tours and stuff, you don't get rehearsal time too often. Most of the time, not at all. Sometimes it's set up and go. Sometimes I don't even get a sound check. It just depends on what happens during the day, so to be in a place like a house of worship where you can jump in, get your feet wet, try anything, during the rehearsal time, and then go live. How cool, and people are a lot more forgiving too in churches as far as that goes. Some churches.
No, but yeah, some churches. She's not wrong about that. Let's be honest with ourselves.
I was just going to say that.
I was like, let me put that disclaimer in there.
But I do think it's the majority. I do honestly think that, and I do think that churches are a fantastic place to learn how to mix music, because the margin of okay is a lot wider in a church environment. Typically, I'm being very general, and obviously some churches are very specific and they want it to sound, but in general, the margin of acceptably okay is much wider than in the professional world. And in the professional world, whoever it is that's writing your check, that's the way you got to make it sound. And if you don't make it sound like the person who's writing your check, and if you can't find that spot, and that margin's usually this big of the way it's supposed to sound, then you've got a problem. At church, it's sort of, especially for the music, it's there's a certain amount of, we want to be able to hear the vocal. We'd like to be able to hear the rhythm if there's a rhythm section. But the reality is that 99% of the congregation, as long as it's not ear-splitting loud, I don't even
Or loud feedback.
Yeah, or loud of feedback. Exactly. As long as it's not blatantly awful, the majority of people will just, say, okay, that was great. It wasn't but it was fine, and you're not dealing with people who've spent $500 a ticket to see their favorite artist that they've listened to the same song 4 million times on Spotify. And now all of a sudden you've buried the lead vocal in kick drum, and now they're very, very unhappy. It's not that environment.
Right.
Yeah. Something I like to do that I have found works really well is to use virtual sound check. And when the band is not there, have your volunteers run through a virtual sound check with you and watch what things are doing. Solo out the worship leader's vocal. Let's talk about compression. This is what's happening when I lower and raise the ratio. This is what's happening, and show them what it's doing and let them listen with their ears on one thing. And you can, when somebody comes in for the first time, they don't really know what to listen for and what is happening with all this processing. But if you can use virtual sound check when there's no pressure to make it be perfect, it gives them a chance to goof around and really whack out the controls so they can hear what's doing. This is what reverb is doing when you add more or less to it. When you bring the fader down, it's in post, so the reverb came down with it. I mean, all these things a new volunteer just won't know until they've had the opportunity to solo it out and do it.
Well, virtual sound check. Go ahead. No, go ahead, Isaac.
No. I was going to say, I use virtual sound check as well. There was a season where I did a program for the local community where I invited all the churches to come in, and that way I wouldn't have to bring a band in, waste, utilize their time, that kind of stuff. Pulled up the virtual sound check and then just had different people from the community come in and just experience what it was, adding the post and pre-verb type stuff, and compression. And it worked out great because it, like you said, Sam, it's board time. You're behind the board. You're able to actually tweak and be able to push buttons. So being able to utilize virtual sound check is a huge thing for me because, again, I'm not requiring 5 members of my band to show up to be there, play that section one more time, or do that, do that again, or I can just roll it back and just have at it. So
well,
exactly.
And there's go ahead, Becky. I keep jumping in, and I need to hush. I'll make my little quick point about for me, a big magic with virtual sound check is being able to show people that the lead vocal doesn't just have lead vocal on it.
Right.
That's a huge eye opener for people. It's when the band's playing on stage, it's very hard to, even if you put headphones on and you solo it, there's still PA coming up, but when you're running virtual sound check and you bring up just the lead vocal, and it's kind of mostly lead vocal-ish, but it's also, snare drum and a whole ton of cymbals, and you can actually hear that guitar cabinet, even though it's off stage, going in the background, and it's not just lead vocal, which is why it really helps make people's the light bulb come on of, that's why I don't have perfect control of the lead vocal with every single thing that I do to this lead vocal channel strip, because that's not the only thing that's there. And then it's you're starting to think in terms of, a lot of these microphones have lots of other stuff in them. And so if you're like, oh, I love the high end on her voice and I want to bring out that breathiness, I'll just, boost 12K on a shelf and it'll be glorious. And all of a sudden your cymbal wash goes and it's just why did it suddenly get all drummy? It's because there's drums in there too. And it's, what an amazing tool, because the only way you can hear that is when there's nothing happening on stage, and you can really hear it.
About
Yep.
Then you can have a conversation about microphone technique. That's a real
Exactly.
eye opener.
That's exactly where I was going to go with my comment, Golden. In our church, we've gotten the worship team and tech team together to all listen back together to virtual sound check
Smart.
and all solo out the worship team people who think they're amazing sometimes, and be like, this is what we're
feel
dealing
seen.
with back here. And not, and just not to embarrass you, but this is what's happening. And then they're all like, oh man, but it gives a more of a community aspect to the worship team and the tech team. Instead of two separate things, we're working together to make this work. And it's really helped unify the team and to be like, oh, they're struggling. You got to teach a mic technique, like Golden said, or you got to talk to this bass player that he can't keep just cranking up every 5 seconds, like listen to what you're doing. It's distorting this, or you're doing, like give me what you're during sound check, what you're going to do during service, and this is what happens if you don't, so it's great to be able to teach everyone that across the board.
Yeah, Becky, that is a great point, because I use that for our rehearsals. I'll always multi-track our rehearsals. And what we do after the rehearsals, we actually bring the worship team out front and play it back to them, and then do that, solo it out. And we did that for many years, to where the members started to learn what arrangement meant. People were not stepping on each other as much, and they started to figure out,
Wow.
I see, I'm in this frequency range as the vocal, and I'm covering up the vocal. I need to spread my hands, or if I need to choose a different sound and all that kind of stuff. So
I need to play an octave up on the keyboard, so it's not all mud,
Right. And all 5 members in the same frequency range, all building up that frequency. And you're like, so, invaluable tool, virtual sound check, for helping even develop the worship team in general. So.
Yeah.
And just in case anybody listening doesn't know what the heck virtual sound check is,
that we just talked about for an hour.
It can still get it. It's an ability to multi-track or record every single input separately onto a DAW, digital audio workstation of some kind. Think Pro Tools or something like that, and then or Tracks Live, which is darn it, Waves, Wave Tracks Live, and then hitting play and it going back into the board the way that it came out. So you're essentially getting a raw recording that you can play back. So it's like there's a virtual band, or you're having a virtual sound check going through. So all of these things that we're kind of talking about are ways to like really fine tune what we're doing, our mixing, but also, like we were just saying, the musicians. I love that idea of having time afterwards where you're bringing the band out and having them listen. Like, I can't imagine how much that blows their mind. Because I've worked with quite a few singers who bring it mentally, are like, you'd think they were like Aretha on stage. But then like I'm in the back, like paffling them, in other words, soloing it only in my headphones. And I'm hearing them, and it's not Aretha. Like, it's not even close. So you got to wonder if they're hearing themselves really, or they're really hearing this blob of everything on stage. And we were also talking about, beyond just the mixing part, but like mic technique and, heaven forbid, changing capsules on mic or picking a different microphone, because that actually ends up being like a huge. If you haven't heard already, here's me telling it to you first. Get it at the source. That's always going to be the whole idea. This is a totally outside of House of Worship mixing or anything specifically, but you should always, the goal is to do as little as you can possibly do in the console. If all the channels just come in and then go out balanced and amplified and it sounds perfect, everybody is doing their job perfectly well. I mean, that'll never happen, but that is the goal. And so by changing things like, like guitarists especially, and drummers spend so much time getting their sound, like what they want to sound like, getting different pieces or different strings or different amps or emulators, things like that, trying to get a specific sound. We need to do the same thing with our mic choices. So if a particular vocalist, for instance, sounds not super great on one mic, it might not actually be the vocalist. It could be the mic capsule or the mic itself. And being able to swap that out could give you completely different results.
Yeah, I think one of the big misconceptions whenever you start talking about mic choice with people, and I literally carried this misconception with me for probably 20 years of my professional career, and that was, well, why can't I just EQ it out? Why can't I just EQ it to sound like something different? And the reality is that the difference in sound between a Beta 58 and a Shure Beta 58 and a Shure Beta 87 is not 3 notches of EQ. It is an almost infinite number of tiny phase and frequency differences that cause completely different characteristics and therefore cause, from the exact same vocalist, from the exact same distance, cause a completely different electrical signal to enter the console, a completely different character to originate. And it's completely different. It's like 2 different singers. You can say, Amy and Susan are both singing the same song, and they're both altos, and they're both singing the same notes. And you're like, but they sound totally different, don't they? Yeah, because Becky's vocal cords and body have a completely different character to them than, I said Becky, I said Amy anyway. The singer one, I just want Becky to sing. This is what it comes down to. It's like this is what it comes down to, is I'm trying to make Becky sing. But
but I'm not singing.
You get the idea. It's like it's a completely different characteristic. And so then the trick is, how do we get a microphone capsule that complements what we want out of that source material, and if necessary, de-emphasizes things we don't want? Sometimes it's de-emphasizes things that aren't the vocal, like it de-emphasizes some of the cymbal wash, or it de-emphasizes that loud guitar amp. And maybe that's part of what we need to do in that environment. Maybe in a different environment, same singer, we can use a different microphone because maybe she's singing in a bluegrass group and it's a really quiet stage, and so now we use a different microphone capsule and we can catch more nuance of her voice because we're not doing quite so much damage control on a loud stage. But it's not an EQ thing. It's not, we tend to talk about different microphones as this one's brighter and this one's darker and this one has more high end and this one has, and in these very general terms. But it's like saying that whatever. I'm not going to talk about Becky singing anymore. But it's so much more complicated is kind of where I'm trying to go with. And I for the longest time, even I didn't really understand that. And now I have a very different conception of, different microphones just have a completely different character that they are lending to the sound that may not even be measurable, but is absolutely hearable. And that's where we get into, let's try different microphones for different things, and that'll create a different result.
I mean, we could go down the rabbit hole. We could go down the rabbit hole with this for quite a while. Even, like one of the churches that I mix in, the main sanctuary sounds amazing with this one woman I'm thinking of on an 87, but then she goes back to the youth to sing with that same 87. It sounds horrible in the youth room because of the different speakers and the way things are placed and the different reflections in that room. So put her on a 58 in that room, she sounds great. But if I put her on a 58 in the sanctuary, good Lord, I'd never get it to sound good. So that's the kind of pay attention and listen to, when I'm training people, like, hey, let's bring all the microphones back to the youth room and plug them all in and let's listen to each one. Tell me what sounds good in this room and why you think it doesn't. And, those kind of things, when you're training people to show them, there is a big difference with rooms and mic capsules. And, there's so many factors that go into that. And it's not, like you said, it's not all EQ.
Hopefully it's not in the EQ. The EQ is really supposed to be, I think we can agree it's supposed to be a corrective measure. And of course we're trying to correct it. The goal is to get at the source, but sometimes it feels like I see people using EQ as just like Brian was saying, I just want it to sound like this, so I'm going to EQ it into submission to get what I want. When really it should be more like gentle nudges or maybe a notch or something like that. Not gigantic, huge boosts at, 500 or something like that. You can't amplifying or making something louder. That's not there in the signal originally is not going to do you any good. So
It's another
Now-
t-shirt. You can't EQ into submission.
Yes.
Now, I'm in
Well,
a situation at Campus Jacks where I work, and all we have are 57s and 58s. So I have one choice, and that is to EQ into submission. Now, because that's the mic that I've been working with for so long there, I've learned how that mic reacts, and I've learned what I can do. And it's not going to be perfect for every singer, but I can force it to do what I need it to do to make that singer sound better. And I agree, every mic capsule sounds different. It has the nuances, but we don't always have access to those. And some of them are quite a bit more pricey. And in the case of Campus Jacks, I'm walking into that venue running sound on their system, using their equipment, and I have to deal with what I'm given. So that's where I am forcing into submission, my SM58. But I did have the lead singer come back to me and said, you know, my family and my audience said, I have never sounded so good, my vocal before. What microphone were you using and what were you doing? And I had to explain to her that it wasn't only about the microphone. That was a plain old SM58, but that I'm paying close attention to detail when I'm contouring that mic and adding processing on it. And that's how I got her vocal to land where it needed to land. So there are different situations as far as choice of microphones or no choice of microphones.
and we also got to remember that a lot of the smaller churches tend to buy microphones based on budget and not so much on quality of microphone.
Right.
So, you know, there's a lot of that where it's like, well, this is what we could afford, and can we make it work, kind of thing. And a lot of the churches that I grew up in, that was a lot of the stuff that I, you know, was dealing with. I mean, literally, we would have a set of PV speakers, an old Ross mixing board, and, you know, some knockoff 58s that we would have to try to make work. But yeah, I just, you know, as we discuss this, just, you know, keep that in mind as well. As, you know, some of us, we moved into this realm where we have access. We get to, you know, some of us get to work with, you know, better equipment, better gear, but there are some churches out there that are strictly working based off a budget.
I think I'll go as far as say as maybe most churches are going with what they've got and what they can work with. And those are excellent points, Golden and Isaac. Absolutely, is that sometimes, like, even though we hope we don't have to use, you know, EQing something into submission, like, but having that tool with us and understanding it makes it an extremely powerful tool. But it is a tool, and so not just haphazardly doing things, you know, trying to make every move with intention, knowing what we're going forward with or what we're trying to get, hitting a target of some kind with every change that we're implementing. But yeah, no, it's definitely not raining microphones or money everywhere. And you got to use what you've got. And there's a certain like art and like play to that, adventure in that, in making it work at whatever cost. So
I think to circle back to, because Golden's point is absolutely spot on. I think one of the reasons why the SM58 is so ubiquitous is because it sounds not bad all the time, and sometimes not bad is pretty good. Like, you know, when we start talking about, you know, the higher echelons of more expensive gear and having this giant mic locker or whatever, we're chasing the last 5% of sound, last 5% of quality. And but the tip that I would say that every church has access to, if you have a microphone, is mic positioning technique. Because
totally agree.
it costs nothing to move a microphone to a different place. It costs nothing to teach your singer how to hold it properly and give you something that you can work with. Like, these are things that, you know, and you will be absolutely amazed at how much of a difference an SM58 moved 3 degrees to a different part of the guitar amp will sound. Like, it will sound like a completely different instrument, and you'll be like, how how did that happen? And even with a vocalist, to teach them, for their voice, for the room, what is a good mic tech? In some cases, it's I need you to eat the microphone and scream because the room is screaming loud, and I can barely hear you because you sing like a mouse. And maybe that's the technique you need to teach, or it's a good loud soft technique or a slightly off access technique or whatever that complements their voice and doesn't cost anything.
Right.
So this brings up another interesting thing with teaching mic technique to vocalists at church. I have found that not everybody is very receptive. How do you respond, or when you're really wanting to help a vocalist with their microphone technique for the overall sound of the mix?
I'll jump in here.
Wow.
Yeah, record them. Yeah, go ahead,
I'll
Becky.
jump in just because
Yes.
I try to do it as jokingly as possible. That's how I do most things. But I have had this one vocalist for about 6 years that is still really bad with her mic technique because she was taught early on to hold it like this. And I'm like, it's not an ice cream cone, man. Like
Right.
that's, so we talked about it personally. I just was like, if you hold it up here and you get it real close, I try to explain proximity effect to her. And then her bad habit is to go back to doing that. So her name's Amanda. I'll throw her under the bus here. She would be fine with that. And I said, I'm going to start calling you Chin Manda every time you do it, and she was like, don't do that in front of people. I said, I'm going to. And she was like, okay, do it because it'll get me out of it. And I was like, okay, but we agreed on it. It's kind of a joke, but
and then nobody else will know what you're talking about except Amanda.
I'm like, Chin Manda, what are you doing up there? And she's like, I'm so sorry. Every time, but she's broke the habit after 6 years of doing that and just joking around with her. But that's just a funny one. But usually I will just pull someone aside and say, if you could do this for me, it would really help your sound a lot more. And just put it back, like, give them the encouragement. Like, your husband can't hear you. And the reason he can't hear you and tells you that when he gets home or, whatever, is because you're 7 feet off your microphone, or you were taught to do this, but it's a 58 and you need to do this,
Yeah.
Becky, I just had the same situation on our tour. The opening band, one of the opening bands, he would cup the microphone, and it was the style was a
Cardinal sin.
new metal microphone. Yeah, he would cup the microphone, and I'd be like, the first time it happened, because I haven't had that happen in like forever, and we had sound checked his mic and everything before the show, and I was like, wow, I got it, really coming out in front of these huge guitars and drums and everything. The show kicks in, and all of a sudden, I think the mic is broken because it obviously changed the entire frequency range. And I was like, what's going on? I had one of my tech guys run up there and swap out the microphone, and he starts talking into it just in between songs. I was like, okay, that sounds great. Kicks into the song. I watched his hand as he cupped it, and I was like, that's it. Yeah. And so for the rest of the tour, I just would do the same thing, just kind of make some little joke or something, or flash a laser at him or something, and just be like, hey man, don't do that again.
Yeah. It's mostly just bad habit, Yeah.
And that's what he said. He goes, I'm so sorry, because it's just a bad habit, because you just see some artists do it and you just figure that's just the cool thing to do. And I was like, well, it works for like an effect. If like there's a transition in the song, you can do it as an effect, but pull your hand off, when you move into the rest of it.
You're not T.I.
Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody put some spikes on that mic.
Right.
I think it's a lot of like gentle nudging and consistent like pushes in that direction. And again, if you're doing like what Becky has mentioned, Becky has so many cool like group training ideas that she's done over the years. Like it's she's wrote about it. It's in Church Sound magazine. I've had her on. You've all been on the podcast at this point, so we've talked about it. Then is like getting them in the room and then listening to that virtual sound check or that recording back. Like, hey, like just FYI, this is what you sound like to the world when you're doing this. And that's a very sobering moment for them. So maybe utilize that.
I think that what everybody's comments were points back to a central premise, which is relationship first and then teaching, relationship first and then guidance. It is, Becky, you just pointed out, you built a relationship with Amanda. where you could then have this ongoing dialogue about this thing and then help her and guide her in a direction instead of it being and sometimes we as technicians want to fix the tech problem first. And especially in a church environment, it just doesn't work that way. It's, you may fix their technique and lose the singer. 6 weeks later, they'll just stop wanting to be scheduled for some reason, and no one will ever know why, and they'll just sort of fade into the background. They'll never confront you. There'll never be a big fight. It'll never be a big thing, but you'll just sort of lose them along the way because they felt challenged. And even if they were wrong, it doesn't matter. They felt unvalidated. They're in a really vulnerable place. They're up there, they're singing. It's their voice in front of a bunch of people. It's freaking terrifying. Trust me, I know. And so, that first step of building that relationship and making sure that we have a communication and we have a connection and we're on the same page, and then starting, that's where getting to know your people and what makes them tick. Some folks, you then know, I can just speak directly into her. I can just talk right to her and go, "You're killing me, girl, you're killing me. You need to stop doing this." And she'll respond. Others will shrink back like a turtle and you'll never get them to sing again. And understanding that some, it's just a gentle encouragement. Let me just show you a little trick that might help you. And then 2 weeks later, remember that thing I showed you? And then 2 weeks later, you remember that thing I showed you? And just a gentle pushing, gentle nudging. And 3 months later, you see a huge improvement. 6 months later, the problem has gone away. And in working with volunteers, working with people in general, to me, it's always like concentrate on the long game, not on the short game.
Yep.
The long game is, I want Amanda to sound amazing. I can put up with Amanda. I love picking on Amanda now. She's now my best friend.
She's famous today.
she's internet famous, like as big as it gets. But the goal is not, I'm going to fix Amanda's bad mic technique for next Sunday, and it will just, I don't care what it takes.
Right.
The goal is, no, we're going to fix this problem long term, so that she's got a long habit ingrained, and I'm trying to work with her to build another habit, and we're on the same page and we're working together. And that's how 10 years later, you're still mixing for Amanda, and Amanda is teaching somebody else.
Yep.
Great mic technique without even realizing where she got it from.
Right.
She's just saying, Rick, I used to do that, and it causes the sound folks problems. And what you need to do is, and the whole thing grows from there. But it always comes back ultimately to relationship. Well,
and I think that's, like you were saying too, the long-term plan. One of the churches I'm working in just switched from monitors to in-ear monitors. And right off the bat, I told everybody in the booth, including the worship pastor and the people on the team, y'all, this is not going to be solved in the next month. Like, this is a long-term thing, and we're going to keep working on it every week. Let's be patient with one another. It's going to take some time, and every week I say the same thing. We're 6 months past that now, and I'm just getting all the good hand signals and all the right things people are telling me, so be patient with your volunteers. They're volunteers. That's the first thing, right? They're not professionals. So let's be patient with one another and work towards the goal,
Yes.
I would also add on to what Brian said, about relationships too, is that's one of the things when I go into churches to teach people is like, look, your relationship between the worship pastor and your sound guy should be like, you guys should be best friends. You guys should be
Yep.
You guys should be having dinner together, hanging out together, that kind of stuff. Because when you develop that relationship from a leadership standpoint, when the worship team looks, because everybody has that mentality that the sound guy is always the bad guy, right? But they'll look to the worship pastor and say, okay, well, the worship pastor is the one who can talk to me. And when you develop that relationship, then the pastor says, hey, well, Isaac, go ahead and talk to so-and-so. And then they can trust because they know that leadership is transferred over. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm the leader of the worship team. However, but Isaac and I are friends. I know where he's coming from. I know where his heart is. Therefore, you can speak for the rest of the team. And, that right there is invaluable, or has been invaluable to me, is just making sure that I'm friends with, I try to do at least the pastor and the worship pastor. If I'm tight with those people, everything else works out just great.
Yep.
Yeah.
Having that relationship is excellent. Just in general, not only for your career and but for what we've been talking about, like having that, developing a relationship with the musicians, with the worship pastor, with everybody on your tech team, it gives you so much more wiggle room. Like it suddenly becomes okay to have an off day, or it's okay to criticize somebody and it not become a personal thing. It's like not an attack. Like being able to go up to the soundboard and chat with the musicians over the comm system and just say, or the talk back and like, hey, like, haha, joking, everybody's in a good mood, and saying, oh yeah, can you turn your guitar amp down because it's doing this and that? And their attitude is just like, heck yeah, I can, sure thing, Sam, like anything for you. And you would return the same favor. Like it's about having that relationship. Like this constant joke on my podcast is that like every conversation boils down to communication and relationship, in life, but particularly as it relates to Church Sound, is everything that we do, all the success that we can achieve starts at and ends with having a relationship and having good communication with other people. That's just good life lessons. So
and going out and having tacos doesn't help. It's not,
it doesn't hurt. No, it does not.
Doesn't hurt. Yeah.
Tacos basically solves everything. That's my takeaway. For the last 20 minutes, we'll just boil it down to tacos solves everything.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked about mic technique and kind of being culture in the church a little bit. I'd like to talk specifically about mixing a little bit. And so what do you guys think is like top absolute must focus when you walk up to a soundboard to mix a service, traditional, contemporary, or otherwise?
Proper gain structure.
Yeah.
That's where it all starts.
Yeah. And then usually in houses of worship, vocalists up front.
More so than maybe any other style of music, I might say, other than just like a cappella, because that's 100% vocals. But
right.
Yeah, having those vocals be even like if you had to err on the side of too quiet or too loud, go scooch over to too loud, because people are there for worship. And so hearing the message that the song is providing is like the most important part. I at least in my experience and what I've gathered over my years is that like somebody needs to be able to walk in off the street without having the lyrics on screen and understand what they're saying and receive that message. Like that's how you get people to connect, is through the words. And if they're like buried, I mean, everybody loves a good bass line. Like we all do.
I was going to say
from the bass player.
Yeah, from the bass player. But I mean, those vocals are they're just so important. I mean, would you guys agree with that?
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. 100%.
So I'm going to be slightly contrarian, as is my
God.
That's your nature. Come on.
as is my nature. No, I agree 100%, except, and this is just a mistake I have felt myself make, and I feel like I've seen others make in a church environment, which is we focus so much on getting our music mix right, and we never sound check the pastor's microphone.
I was just going to say that, Brian.
You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
It's like we never sound check the video roll to make sure it's actually working, or we never, check the whatever, like, we get so, because it's far more complicated and there's way more things to do with it. We spend 95% of our focus on got to make the music part sound great. And for most of us in most faiths, if you look at the run of service, the majority of the service is not the music. The majority of the service is the message, it's
Teaching
announcements,
of the word,
it's a teaching of the word, it's videos that are coming up. And we tend to just sort of, and all of that work that we've done to make like the perfect band mix and the perfect everything. And then the person who's giving the announcements walks up and you can't find their microphone because it's on the wrong layer, and they start to talk and you can't hear them, and you hunt, there it is, you turn it on. That moment that you've worked so hard to create has just gone up in smoke, because now everyone is out of the moment because a microphone that needed to be turned on at the right time wasn't turned on.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. Totally
And
agree.
it's boring and nobody wants to talk about it, and it's dull, and it's, it's like, oh, make sure the mic works. But it's and some, maybe some of this is because I make my living primarily doing corporate audio.
Yeah.
I'm even more focused on these things. It's like error prevention
Yeah.
is really more important than everything. Once you've got that sorted, now let's talk about make this vocal sound fantastic, and let's make this be a moment, and let's make sure that everybody's but let's make sure that the pastor's mic is working correctly. And if we work this way, make sure that the switch on his wireless is locked on so we can't turn it off. And
It's why we're gathered here in the first place.
And make sure that I've laid out my fader layers so that it's always on top, so that no matter what, even if he suddenly decides in the middle of the song he wants to suddenly charge up on stage and start talking, even though he's never done that in the history of the church, that I can get his microphone turned on because he's got something super important he needs to say.
Yeah.
And once we've got all that sorted and we, got that comfortable, and I do like in houses of worship, whoever's doing kind of the announcements, sometimes that is the pastor, depends on the service, but whoever's doing the other talking, and then whoever's, giving the message, those faders live on the top of my console, and they never go off the top of my console, no matter what else I'm doing. Cause I want to see those little lights blinking, because that makes me know that the transmitter's working. It makes, I just want to know that we're golden there. Yep. And now I'll focus on getting all these other bits. So, and forgive me if that was a contrary, although everyone seemed to agree with me. So, apparently it was a popular opinion.
I'm actually doing a training in 2 weeks, and every single person is wearing a headset, and we're talking about how to turn it on and where to put it and how to set it up. So everyone in the booth knows if that headset's here, it's in the wrong spot, and if it's not sound checked through the PA, it's not
on the stage. Exactly.
On the stage. Yeah.
Yeah, literally last Wednesday, our pastor at my church tried to pull I'm just going to sound check from the floor because I'm in the middle of something thing. And our new sound audio guy that we just hired like a month ago was like, nope, no, pastor, I need you on the stage so we can do a real sound check. And I just wanted to say, I want to be like, hey, yes. And I know that had to be intimidating because he's the new guy. And this is the campus pastor of the church who's been there forever. But he was right. It's like, it'll only take 5 seconds, but I need you where you're going to be talking in that microphone before this service so that if there's going to be an issue, I know it now. And yeah.
Let me take that even one step further and say that it'll be the hardest part of the whole service is nailing the announcement and the pastor or minister mic. Like there's nothing to hide behind. Like everything that's wrong with the room, in the PA, in the mic, in the way that they speak will become so blaringly obvious because there's nothing else in the way. And so, yeah, we're all right there with you, Brad. That is 100% accurate. And it's incredibly important, and it might be super hard. If I've had I've gone in, and most of my work with houses of worship now are either like deploying systems, or I go in and I'm like a hired gun for the weekend. And so I'm just dealing with what they've got. And so sometimes like a 10-second sound check with the pastor seems like a really big inconvenience to them. But it's so important because especially in a lot of these church buildings, the room is super wacky, or it was not built at all to have amplification in it. And so it's for the whole gain thing. And it's like, if I don't hear you at your speaking level on stage where you'll be standing, I need everything to be exactly the same, because otherwise anything can happen. Like feedback is a really big one with the headsets. Like I'm going to get feedback or something's going to sound weird. I've had pastors who do not want their volume like changed at all after they start the sermon. They can tell they don't want it to be changed. And so it's like, you have to be like really quick and very tiny, slow movements. And so you got to put your foot down, sometimes and say, no, these circumstances need to happen, because if you just walk on there, anything could happen. I have no idea.
I used to work at a Pentecostal church. Well, I've worked at a couple Pentecostal churches, and you get the pastors that pull the mic way down here, and they talk real softly when it's down here. But when they get really excited, they push it up here, and you're like, can you just reverse that? Like, can you yell when it's down here? And can you? Like, that would help me out a whole lot more.
Have you guys had it ever worked with any pastors and ministers that also like to sing during the service? Because that's a crazy signal processing chain.
Yes.
That is a lot.
Yep.
For those of you that don't for those of you who haven't experienced it yet, like some leaders of the church like to either sing in the middle of their sermon, or they like singing from the pew, like while worship music is happening. The former is absolutely a nightmare. It's lots of fun, but I've done it before where they'll just be preaching at a normal volume, and then suddenly they break out into song, and it's like full volume singing, and it's like it's almost like I wish I could just
blowing
copy your channel over here and have a completely different chain, and then just like hit both mute buttons at the same time and swap them.
Yes. That's one way to do it, I guess.
There's a lot of ways you could do it. There's expanders, and there's we won't get into. But yeah, on that same kind of mixing topic. So definitely the vocals, and definitely the pastor or the announcement, whoever's kind of talking the most during the service. But what else do you guys think? Like, and Becky mentioned gain structure earlier. Like, do you guys approach mixes differently based on I don't want to say genre, but style of worship music? So I know that some have a contemporary or modern sound, and some have a more traditional. So how do you guys kind of approach those differently?
Well, I worked in a church. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I worked in a church, St. Andrews in Newport Beach, where I was the audio coordinator there. And we had two services. One was a classic service with a full orchestra, and the other one was a contemporary service like we mostly see. And the whole dynamic and everything about it was they were so different from each other. In our classic service, we would mic our orchestra sectionally, but the conductor did not want, other than high pass filters, he didn't want any other kind of EQ on those mics. And he didn't want compression, no processing, and we didn't need reverb in that building. But he wanted to hear the orchestra do the dynamics, and the sound reinforcement was only to make it heard to the point where it was comfortable for everyone. And it was the same with the choir. He didn't want us mixing. He wanted the choir to do the mixing. So that whole dynamic was so different than when our contemporary band got up, where we could, I have to say, the musicians all had great mic technique, and they were great players. So we got to actually process them and make them sound like a record. But the difference between the two, I remember when because that was my first time doing a full orchestra. It was just so different, and having to adapt to the different mentality and bow down to what the conductor was asking me to do. That's another dynamic in church that that we need to watch out for, is the worship leader, or in this case, the conductor. To a point, they are calling the shots because they know their music, they know their genre, and where a classical choir and orchestra will control their own dynamics. A contemporary band, not so much. You get to have some control of their dynamics. So that was a really interesting experience for me.
I would say, going back to the whole relationship thing as well, having that relationship when I sit with pastors or worship pastors, I say, okay, what are we going for? What's the sound that we're after? And if it's something that I may disagree with or may have an opinion about, I typically pull those in during rehearsal and do I could do it this way. What do you guys think of this, of me processing this way or that way? And that way we're not doing that before a service and we're not causing any confusion or anything like that. But, the way that I mix for most people is I'll go in, I'll sit with the pastor, say, what are we looking for? What is the sound that we're after? And they'll give me a list. Oh, well, we want to sound like this worship team and this worship team and this worship team. Cool, great. I got a picture of what we're after. I'll get us, close to those things. Just keep in mind that we're going to have to make some arrangements of adjusting the way people play and where they play and how they play in order for you to get there.
Can I make a quick interjection, just right on that comment, is that worship music in the church and houses of worship are a little bit more interesting because it's almost intentionally all cover music. Some people do original stuff, but you have so many different people have done so many different stylings of the same song that you have so much content to pull from to compare and say, okay, well, what do we want to sound like? Exactly like you just said, Isaac. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, no. And that's pretty much the end of the point. It's just, when you approach, so, how do you mix? Or it's, for me, I sit with the people, find out what they're after, the sound that they're after, and I try to get them there. But if I do have a different opinion of it, I try to only do that during rehearsals and try to present it during a rehearsal so that way we're not fighting during a service or something. So.
That's an excellent point.
Only because Becky didn't jump in fast enough. Contrary to what I may appear to be, I spent a tremendous amount of my life in traditional churches, both singing on stage and mixing them and doing those kinds of things. And there are some real fundamental differences. Golden hit on one of the biggest ones, which is traditional music. It comes from a classical place. And a classical place, the conductor is the audio engineer. That's the way it works.
Yeah.
They're the sound designer, exactly. So your role as an audio engineer in that environment is, okay, I'm taking these elements and I'm balancing them to each other in this space so that they sound good in this space and they're balanced with each other. And then I'm just slowly backing away. And
yes.
And then basically the music director, one of the main churches that I worked in and sang in and did everything else for a long time was a church called Emmanuel Bible Church in Springfield, Virginia. And, they had a big, huge choir and big orchestra. And there was a music director who was, over all of it. And so he's conducting the choir and the orchestra and everything. And, at the end of the day, if they come to a big moment and everything swells and they bury the lead vocal, that's what they did.
Yeah.
Like it was, music director had the option to pull them back so that the vocal came out. If he didn't do that, that was his choice.
Yeah.
And so in that big moment, he was intentionally or otherwise choosing to bury the lead vocal for that big swell. And that was a musical choice. And those are the kinds of things that you just, you go, that's his gig, that's his responsibility. My thing was, just make it sound like it's sort of a thing. And then just kind of with most contemporary music, we're in a completely different environment. We're about the only ones who are in a position to have both control over the dynamics and can actually hear the dynamics. No one on stage can actually hear the dynamics of what's actually going on because they have the wrong perspective. None of them are in a position to change the dynamics. There isn't a music director person. And so that mantle kind of falls on us. And now we're trying to get direction from perhaps the worship pastor or the music director on stage, who's giving us general direction of what it is that they want it to sound like. But then we have to interpret that and actually make it happen, because we're the only ones that have the tools necessary to really make those judgments. And that's where that trust thing comes into play, and that relationship comes into play. But they're just very different. And, and then if you get into a situation where you've got these kinds of in-between churches that are sort of like traditional, but with a rhythm section,
Yeah.
then it gets really murky. And at the end of the day, it really, it all has to come back to, it's not about me. It's not about how good an audio engineer it is. It's not about how good a mixer I am. It's not about it's not about me. And, if subverting my idea for someone whose responsibility is to lead this is the right thing to do, that's the right thing to do. And that's what we do. And that's what we should do. It's, I have lots of ideas of the way that I want things mixed, but like at the church I'm at now, when I mix services at the church I'm at now, I don't mix it the way I want it to sound. I mix it the way I know that leadership wants it to sound, and that's ultimately, that's the common thread through all of it, whether it be a traditional service or a completely contemporary or a gospel or scream and shout or hip hop or whatever the style is. Ultimately, it's, we are in service to the leadership of what is it that they're trying to project, what's the experience that they're trying to bring everybody to, and then we just facilitate that, sometimes very actively, sometimes more passively, depending on what's the right answer to the question at hand.
Yeah,
Brian, I just go ahead.
No, you're okay.
I was just going to ask Brian, like, isn't it that kind of the same way though? Even when we work in the secular industry, I mean, when we're working for artists, I mean, essentially, it's not about us; it's about what the artist wants. So, if I were to take a look at my job, really, my job is to make things happen that people want to happen. And I just have the knowledge and the tools to make it happen.
I do think there are two kinds of audio engineers. There are audio engineers that make it sound like they want it to sound. And if they're very fortunate, famous rich people like that sound and hire them. And then there are other audio engineers like me and others who I don't have a sound. Like I don't have my sound is what is it you're going for? And that's what I try to do. I don't think either one of those is superior or better. I think that there are people who have a sound to their mix, and that sound is super cool. And if James Taylor decides they like it, exactly. And, and if James Taylor decides I really love the way that David Morgan mixes, then I'm just going to basically hire him forever. Then there's nothing wrong with that. Like, that's fine. Right. But for a lot of us, we are trying to, as you said, Isaac, figure out what is it that what's your end, where are you trying to get? And then I'm going to facilitate how to get us there. Right.
Okay, cool. I love it.
Yeah, I was going to add as a footnote to the what Brian and Isaac were saying is that, okay, well, it just left my brain. Gosh.
It'll come back. Don't worry.
Yeah.
You just have to think about what were you thinking about before you were thinking about that.
Yeah.
It's like virtual sound check.
Yeah.
Yeah. I almost had it. I felt it like, shoo, like, I tried to go. It's about like knowing, recognizing when you have control over something and when you don't have control over it. So like what came to mind while you were talking, Brian, was that like the difference between having like a choir that would be choir mics, so like 2 or maybe 3 choir mics on them, and having a group of singers in a group where they all have handhelds. Like you approach those extremely differently, and you have a lot of control over one and almost none over the other. And so if you are in that kind of more traditional choir setup where you have 2 or maybe 3 like choir mics on them, if the tenors are not loud enough, you're not going to be able to pull that out of someplace. Like if somebody is soloing too quietly, all you can do is like boost up one of the mics and hope it gets in there. But like, that's all you can do. Everybody's got a handheld, which is a very popular answer in like a lot of like more gospel groups, where there will be like, I've mixed one recently for funsies. They had, God, how many singers were there? Maybe 8 or 9 singers, and they all had handhelds. And that is, by the way, super fun to mix, but you still have to approach it from a group aspect. Like, you can't sit there and totally process the crap out of one channel, because you're going to add in 8 other mics and it's going to all be different.
And they're all switching solos like throughout a song.
Yeah. Starts to get into like theater world, where it's like all you're doing is
Right.
hitting cues and don't worry about anything else. But yeah, and understanding and recognizing what you do have control over and what you don't. Like, you can't, putting lipstick on a pig, for a better for worse phrase. Like, we do the best with what we've got, and we have the tools at our disposal and the knowledge that we've got. But like, I can't make the drummer play in time with my console. Like, that's not going to happen. So
Not yet. Not yet.
Darn it. Yeah.
Boy, I wish we could.
Yeah.
Right. Who here is the drummer?
I don't think anybody's a drummer here.
I'm a very poor drummer, so I wouldn't call myself a drummer. But yeah, 99% of our problems would be solved by a drummer who plays in time. That's sort of the bedrock of it all. It's like, man, if the drummer's tight, man, everybody else could be really, really loose and all over the place. But if the drummer's tight and the singer can sing on key, we're going to have a good day. Like, let's face it. When I was a music director, I figured out very quickly that I was in charge up until the moment the song started, and then the drummer was in charge up until the song ended, and then I got to be in charge again. That's just kind of the way it works. So.
Okay, so we have a couple other questions that I may try to rapid fire here, but as a one kind of final quick like topic to discuss for us, I want to hear you guys' opinion on it, is in general a career like in houses of worship. I want to make note that you don't have to follow a particular denomination to work in their church. Some may prefer it. You don't have to agree with them 100%. Like, it doesn't have to be that way. There's a lot of churches I've worked for, a lot of pastors I've mixed, where they're spitting things in the night that I vehemently believe against, but that's kind of okay. You sort of have to draw your own boundaries there, but you don't have to necessarily follow them to get everything that we've been talking about this entire time. You can get the board time, the experience, the community, the family, and not be a particular follower of a particular denomination. I just want to say that, and that working in house of worship is a great career field, whether you get your start in it or you stay there for 2 decades, or you are in it for your whole life. It is an excellent career option where, it's definitely you're not getting paid millions of dollars unless, no, not even at Hillsong, I don't think. But
No.
Typically the benefits are much better. They typically have better work-life balances. So you get sweet bennies most of the time, but you get a lot more stuff working in a house of worship. But I don't know if you guys wanted to add anything in particular about a career in house of worship.
I think in the end, it's just a matter of God's will and how things turn out. I started at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. And when our lead pastor, Chuck, passed away, the flock dispersed to a bunch of other churches. And over the next 3 years, most of the staff was let go, including my husband, who was a pastor. And then I kind of, at that point when he left, I left with him. So I had looked into getting into other fellowships to lead worship, not lead worship, I'm sorry, run sound. And I did at St. Andrews for a few years. And I did spend some time as the AV director at Refuge Calvary Chapel in Huntington Beach. But it just became obvious to me that where God was leading me was to be a teacher. So, and I was able to teach more people by being a parachurch helper rather than working in a single church. And that's just how God seemed to have led me. And now I'm working in a specific church and also with other churches. So, and I didn't plan that. I didn't push for it. It's just the way God allowed it to happen.
I think that a lot of I have a bunch of things I want to say on this, and I'm going to basically not say all of the negative things and only say the positive things, because that's a good thing. But no, the one thing that every church struggles with is good audio in their services. Like, it is a huge struggle. Every single person in a service can tell if the audio is bad. It's just, so that every church struggles with having really good audio. It is a constant need. I think that churches are either trying to not hire a full-time audio person, or have finally given up and are hiring a full-time audio person. And the former almost always ends up turning into the latter, because it's difficult. It's very difficult to run audio in church at a really high level. Just as a volunteer is something that you spend 2 hours a month doing. And that means that there's a huge career opportunity there. Of course, as soon as you're hired on as the audio person, you're going to leak into the video department and the graphics department and everything else. And perhaps most importantly, you're going to have to build and develop people skills that you might not have had to have otherwise. I think that's a good thing. I think it's a great thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a downside to that at all, but it's a good thing to keep in mind. Just knowing how to get a great snare sound is not the best way to have a long-term church tech career. It's really going to end up being, how do I work with other people, and how do I get the most out of them, and how do I create teams to multiply myself beyond myself, et cetera, et cetera. But, is that, we talked a little bit before we went live with this about sort of this idea that, church tech job is just a stepping stone to a real job out in the real market. For those of you who are only listening, I'm doing bunny ears, finger quotes. That's just not true. I think one of the most challenging and fulfilling and wonderful things you could do for your entire life is work as a church tech director. I can't think of some place where you would learn more and grow more as a person and have more interesting technical and managerial and personality challenges that you have to overcome, and you'll grow as a person, and you'll grow as a technician, and because there's almost no limit. It's like the second that you think you've got a handle on it, the church says, oh, and now we're starting a live streaming ministry, and now you have to suddenly learn everything about live streaming when you knew nothing about it 3 seconds before.
So do you find that leadership sometimes pushes you to the next level?
Well, absolutely. And there's sort of an expectation that, they know tech stuff, and wherever you are, however much you may have learned, you may know 47 things, and they're just like, so there's a baseline of, okay, so they know some tech stuff. It used to always surprise our main admin at the church I worked in that I didn't know how to fix the copier. Like, she was like, it's tech. How come you don't know how to fix I'm like, I don't know anything about copiers. Like, why would you think I know anything about copiers? Well, you know computers and stuff. So, but yeah.
Update my iPhone.
Right. Like, why can't you solve my Windows problem? And
all day.
But we're joking and we all have this knowing laugh. But I learned how to do things that I would have had zero reason. I know more about video now than I ever had any reason to ever know. It's like, I didn't really set out to learn Final Cut Pro. That was not really on my agenda, but suddenly here I am. And now I know Final Cut Pro. And now oh, wow. Oh, we need to address all of the DMX, and guess who gets to figure that out? But it keeps you, as somebody who's on the later side of their career, those kinds of challenges keep you going. And, it's far more interesting and far more challenging. And I think that it's something that is far too often discounted as just a stepping stone or just something you do on the side, or it's just a little part-time thing. And there are so many opportunities, and there are so many fantastic houses of worship with strong, caring, loving leadership that are just desperate for that person who will come in and own what to them is magic unicorn voodoo. Like, they have no idea how it works. And if they just had somebody that could come in and just take it and lead it and make it happen, like, they would take care of you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, my answer is the same as Brian. He actually said everything word for word that I was going to say. So
I was going to say,
really, including the unicorn voodoo.
Yeah.
Then we're like in sync. That's impressive.
I was going to say, I have friends of mine who've been front of house engineers, touring front of house engineers for pop acts for 35 years, and they have never run a headset microphone. Yeah, and then I have church techs that have been church techs for 2-3 years, and they've probably done 100% more than what this touring engineer has done. Like you were saying, audio, video, lighting, everything, because
we have to be diverse.
Yeah, you get thrown into these situations like, oh, by the way, we have a drama team on stage today. And tomorrow, I need 27 lights hooked up in this other room. And, all these different things are happening all the time in churches. I'll take a church tech any day of the week if I'm looking for someone to do something, because I know, like I think I put this in an article, Sam, like it's the Star Trek reference again, right? Like we'll go.
I love Star Trek.
We'll go where no one has gone before.
Yes.
That's the church tech
awesome.
all day, And then I was like, yeah, all day.
So Becky, where do I send my resume?
I even find for smaller churches that they are taxed with even more to do. Like, I was an audio specialist in my mega church at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, and at St. Andrews. But now that I'm working at a smaller church, I'm doing front of house, monitors. I'm running the live stream, headphones on and off, on and off, on and off, on and off. And I'm also doing the video on the live stream. So, and once in a while, when the words person isn't there, I'm doing that too. And I have my iPad next to me. So at smaller churches, I find that they often end up doing every role, and they learn to multitask.
Yeah, I love hiring people who have experience in houses of worship, because they're because just like we said, like they have set so many different skills, but then also their like customer service is like unmatched with the way that they approach and that goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of this panel, when it's like just the culture inside of a house of worship is just special. It's just a little bit different. And so having that and taking it out to the secular world, like no client is ever angry that you are too kind or you were just too understanding. Yeah. Nobody says that. It's never a bad thing to be like that. So
yeah, agreed.
Okay, so I've got some questions that I think will semi-rapid fire. So whatever's the next step down from rapid, we'll medium fire these. Okay, what is the most difficult thing about your job in house of worship? What's the most difficult thing?
People. Just kidding. No.
All right, next. No.
No.
Yeah. I would say the lack of communication from the top to the booth. Like that to me has always been the most difficult, to get all 27 pastors talking to me in a language I can understand, to get all of their services going in the right way. And the communication has to happen.
Yeah.
People.
Any way it can.
People. People are people, so why should it be?
There you go.
Are we all voting people? Okay, Becky, now you jump in now. You sing.
Yeah, no. There'll be no singing.
Brian, are you voting people as well?
I feel like I have to now, or all the other people will be mad at me. I will say a technical challenge. I think the most challenging technical thing in the house of worship world, and this is primarily in contemporary worship, is dealing with SPL and dealing with the fact that drums are too loud for 8 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. They are too loud. Drums are too loud for people at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. And this is one of those,
like, it's the older crowd that attends that 8 o'clock service.
Well, I'm sorry. Well, even I'm the older crowd now, but like even when I was the younger crowd,
you
it's
look
like
great,
8
Brian.
o'clock.
I wasn't talking about you.
Oh, no, but I'm talking about me. But like 8 o'clock in the morning, nobody wants to be beat over the head with a stupid snare drum. Like they just don't. And it's this huge disconnect of, drums are an inherently loud instrument.
Yeah.
They just are. And as soon as you try to mix that with, I just got up and I had 1 cup of coffee and I want to come in and I want to sing some songs and listen to my pastor give a message, those two things are at odds with each other. And it's a very, very, very difficult challenge from a tech standpoint to come to terms with. And it's why I think that the most challenging front of house mix position there is Sunday morning contemporary music mixer, particularly in a space for, say, 500 people or less, where the space is so small that the stage volume is in everybody's faces. And it's one of those things, it's the big giant elephant in the room that I talk about a lot, because we all talk about, we'll put little shields in front of put little screens in front of the cymbals, or maybe if the drummer plays a little bit lighter, or maybe it's like, no, this is a huge elephant. This elephant is
stick
huge.
him in a cage, man. That'll fix everything.
I'm sorry, but you just have to deal with it. You either have to get a digital elephant, or you need to put the elephant in the cage. These are the only things. Otherwise it's an elephant and you're stuck. I'm sorry. Like you're never gonna be happy. So anyway, that's my so much for being rapid fire. But that was
that's and I'll add and I'll say the biggest problem that I think that I see is room acoustics. Because so many of church buildings are either so old that it was literally before electricity was around, at least that we were harnessing, that it was built intentionally for amplification from the stage. And so adding extra amplification makes things 100 times worse, or things where when they were building it, they had to cut corners and the corners got cut on acoustic treatment, things like that. And out of control room acoustics is such it's a really hard thing. And there's kind of like what Brian was saying, like there's no overcoming that. All you can do is start from scratch or do a ton. Yeah, it's damage control or do a bunch of treatment. Bring an acoustician and have them do a bunch of tests and get it properly fixed.
This was the case for my classical church, where they had the classical service, and then 20 minutes later we transitioned into our modern service. It was created for the choir and the orchestra. So all the walls are hard walls. Oh, they sound great. And the organ sounds magnificent. But the modern band, oh my goodness, that is tough. It was just triage.
Yep. So that's that 100%. I see that more than anything. Okay. What effects do you use and how do you use them? Becky, go.
I use a warm haul most of the time on vocals and played on the snare. How do I use them? Sparingly. And I always turn them off when people talk.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes.
That might be my pet peeve. I'm just saying.
Me too. Oh my goodness.
It's church, but the pastor should not have reverb.
Yes.
No. Asterisk on that is I hate when people I hate an effects mute button. I hate it. I feel like effects should be faded out either between songs when they're like praying or something like that. But I don't want to spend all this time building all of this space in a mix and then just like rip the carpet out from underneath it when they're about to pray. So I really just have an effects DCA or something like just nearby, fade it down, take it like halfway down. And just so it's not as roomy, but
Yeah.
we're not. It's not like super sterile either.
And it's super apparent
please.
in your broadcast mix if you mute effects.
Oh God,
It's
yes.
super apparent in your broadcast mix if you mute the stage mics all at once. I mean,
Yeah. But yeah, no, don't ever put like reverb or anything on the pastor. So that's all right.
Well,
Other-
go ahead. No,
I was
go
gonna say
ahead.
other effects you guys use in that.
Well, and my little stupid human trick with regards to dealing with muting effects is to either lower or mute them on the send side, not on the return side. Because that basically, even if you hard mute it, you still left the tail of the reverb trailing off, and it feels natural. It feels less. Or by the same token, if you just take 50% off that send, it's a much more natural kind of. It's still there. It's still doing the same thing. It's just a little bit more in the. You aren't sending as much stuff to it. So that's another. People kind of reflexively just mute the channel return, and it's just like the reverb falls off a cliff, and it's very jarring.
yeah.
Yep. Other effects you guys typically use and how you use them. Like I've become quite. I use chorus. No, is it a chorus? Yes. Yeah, I use a chorus a little bit more on some of the vocals, but it's like a really light touch. I mean, it shouldn't be actually not really audible, or at least not noticeable. So it adds, like a thickening part of thickening of the vocals, but without
Especially
like it
on
being
group
this
vocals.
weird.
Yeah.
And make it a little bit thicker. There's lots of different ways you can kind of make more stuff appear in the mix that's not actually there.
Using a slight pitch shift has the same effect as chorus, and I found that to be super useful. Another thing I really like to do with my vocal reverbs that I found allows the transient of a vocal to pop out is add pre-delay to my vocal reverbs. It really helps allow that dry sound to poke out first, which helps with clarity in the words.
Yeah, I'll use the ADT on the D Live to thicken out my vocals a little bit. I'll use a delay, a warm haul, and a plate. But with my delays, I don't let the delays run dry. I actually run them back into my reverb so that they're actually, they're not dry delays. They're actually kind of washy a little bit.
Very interesting. Yeah, I love delays. It's a really fun way to, again, like add it, make it seem like there are more people on stage, or it's a lot thicker than it is without having to actually do it. I'll even, like, my favorite trick to do is I'll keep my my delay return nearby, and especially on like Oceans or other songs that are kind of like begging for as much space as possible. I'll like in the middle of their phrases, the vocal phrases, I'll actually really ride up, and I will ride them with their volume and their verbiage, and bring it right back down so there's no tail on it. But when they're in the middle of it, it feels so full and it feels so thick, but it's not poking out on the end. I love doing that. I think it's such a cool effect. I think everybody should try it. Like, just go nuts on this and see what happens if you like really go for it and are really truly writing it like it was its own little instrument in the middle of these phrases, and then duck it out.
Another thing I like to do is I have a reverb and a quick delay mixed together for the vocals, but then over on the DCA channel, I have there, for whoever the lead vocalist is on that particular song, I'll have a long delay set and a tap tempo ready. And just at those magic moments, I'll have the tap tempo in with the song, and at the end of that tail, I'll push that out. And it just has such a beautiful effect for a song like Oceans.
And again, a big trick is making the changes on the send side, not the receive side. So you can cut consonants, you can cut harsh, whatever they call that, but you know what I'm saying. The harsher sounds out with your finger, essentially. So it's like on the nice vowel holds, you're like, oh, I'm just gonna go crazy with the amount of extra O's I'm putting in this. And then as they get close to the end of that O, it's like, and it's like, they go to the next word and then like back up with the next, and it's like, it becomes this huge thing. And because you're doing it on the send side rather than the return side, you never get that C sound going ka, 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 sounding like Friday the 13th. It's just a nice, cool, like, big echoey kind of sound.
I know we're doing rapid fire questions, but I like to add on to that. I like to active mix and not just set it and forget it. I like being involved. So
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good point.
I like being
Isaac.
interactive with it
Yeah.
and moving with it because every song is different. Even parts of the song are different, and I'm always making slight changes, very slight changes most of the time. The big ones are when singers change, and then you do, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so one last rapid fire question. Okay, so how does your side fill or your front fills, how do your fills mix differ from your front of house mix, if at all? If you guys are, if that's something that you deal with.
All right, I'll jump on the grenade, and then somebody else can jump right after me. It depends on what they mean by the question, I think, is part of the answer. But if it's a front fill and I've got a noisy stage, then I'm putting in the front fill things that aren't coming off the noisy stage. That's the just general rule of thumb. And I'm hacking all the low end out of the front fills because there's plenty of that rumble happening from other places. And so that's sort of
front
a
fills
big,
are typically physically smaller anyway, so they're not really.
Exactly. And it's like, hack all the low end out of it. I mean a lot of it. Like you can go 250 down sometimes and just make it's just sibilance and mid-range, just adding a little bit of, but it depends on what your stage sounds like. If you've got a whole bunch of bass amp or stuff coming off the stage and you're just sprinkling vocals on top of that to make the front of right in front of the stage have a nice balance, and that's what you're doing. I will say that it does lead me to the most difficult seats in the house, and the thing that everyone never seems to understand is the most difficult seats in the house to get right are the ones in the middle in the very front. That's the hardest mix to get right. And invariably, that's where the chief elder sits or the senior pastor or whatever. They always sit in the middle, in the front, which is the hardest place to sound. But it's just a good thing we tend to forget that. We don't go there. We don't stand there. We walk up and down the aisles. We walk in the spaces in front of the speakers. We don't go. Sometimes it feels awkward during rehearsal to walk up within 5 feet of the lead singer and stand there and listen because you're like stare at them and they're like, why are you here? And so we tend to skip that area, and it is it's often it's the dead spot in the PA. It's the place where if there's any stage volume whatsoever, it's the worst. And just keeping that in mind and being, mindful of the fact that, and with different players, it may be different. You may have one bass player that runs direct with just in-ears and is perfectly happy with that. And you get one feel in that spot. And then the next week, you've got a bass player who wants to have his amp on stage to have a little bit of feel. And now all of a sudden I've got way more low end down front, and I need to deal with that with some kind of fill. So I don't know if that answered the question, but it answered my question.
Yeah.
So I think, no, go ahead, Golden.
Okay. So how many of you have been to Disneyland? I live by Disneyland. So I've been to Disneyland like tons of times. When you go to Disneyland and you go on those rides, do you notice as you go in front of the different attractions that their talking voice is what you hear, and it sounds like it's coming from them? In the church, in the house of worship space, especially in larger churches or where left, right are placed so far apart, the pastor, when he's teaching, feels disembodied from everything because his voice is just everywhere. And what I have found is helpful is to put a front fill and put the pastor's voice in that front fill so he doesn't disconnect from everywhere else. And I know it's mostly for the middle section, but I still think that's super important. There still is a perception from the people on the sides that that pastor is speaking from his spot instead of being disembodied, his voice being disembodied from where he is.
Yeah,
that's a great
I wanted
thing.
to experiment more with.
I was going
to say really fast. We're going to get this, Isaac. Okay, I have a quick it's maybe want to experiment with LCR more because it's like you can do those kinds of things or create almost, you can have a little bit more fun with panning when you've got almost like a third dimension on it. All right, Isaac, over to you.
No, I was just going to say, when I worked at a church in California, our pastor actually bought us all season passes to go study, different aspects. How did they do signage? How did they do communication to large groups of people? For me, it was, audio, all that kind of stuff. How did they present the audio? What is it when you're in a small room, when you're in a big room, that kind of thing. So it was a great
Disneyland
experience.
is the place for that.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I mixed in Orlando for 12 years at a church. So everybody there has been to Disney, and it's like, that's what I'm competing with. So it's like, if audio doesn't sound like it does, during the week at Disney, then I'm doing something wrong. So yeah, same thing. We studied all that kind of stuff. And my front fills in that church, we would put the pastor and then the worship pastor led on an acoustic. I would always put his acoustic and his vocal in there as well. As the praise team, but nothing else, because wooden stage, everything flying off of it, and you're going to hear that anyhow. Pastor sits 6 feet in front of the sub that's under the stage. So he's got plenty of sub, that's just kind of how a lot of worship places have set their things up, and so I'd give him enough so that he could hear the person who's leading, whoever that happens to be.
Yeah. I got a very similar question that I want to make a comment on. It says, how does your side fill mix differ from your monitor mix, if at all? And I haven't been to very many churches that have side fills and floor wedges. Do you guys see that very often?
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
I mean, if it was like a jazz church, maybe, I could see that being a thing. But I guess I'll try to quickly answer this. I don't see it in churches very often, but if you happen to be in a house of worship where this is happening, I would kind of ask, whose monitor mix are you talking about? Because I would want to if I was doing a side fill mix, it would be like a really like generic kind of like the band mix, so that's what they're hearing, not a particular, like a monitor mix is for that individual person and what they need to hear. And the side fill, I'm trying to fill in the blanks, but hopefully
I use them for my big bands that come in at Campus Jacks, the side fills, and they're super helpful for, in big band, they're not used to reinforcement. So, but they still need to hear what the piano player on the other side of the stage is doing. So I'll go, stand somewhere in their spot and put in a mix where they can hear everything equally. Yeah, for sure. Okay,
sorry.
No, please.
I was going to say, I've used side fills in churches in the past for a choir situation. So the choir was listening to the side fills, and they didn't have monitor wedges. At that point, lead pastor and what they need for reference, because they have choir mics, and oh Lord, that's going to pick up in there. So less is more. I guess is what I would say on those.
Side fills for choirs, at least the choirs that have to stay there when the pastor is teaching, are super helpful, just so they can hear the pastor teach.
Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't had a choir stay in the loft during the sermon in a very long time. Like they all go into a green room and listen, or go out into the pews and listen.
Yeah. Our St. Andrew's choir, they had them stay put. So
they all head out to Starbucks. I was like, that's okay.
Oh man.
As long as they bring me back one.
Yeah. Then anything's fine. Okay. Well, I just want to say thank you guys for joining me, and I want to give you a platform. Does anybody have any final comments? Anything you'd like to add, or that we didn't talk about? Anything like that?
I have to say, it's been so fun listening to all of you guys. It just, sometimes you feel stuck in your own little world and no communication with any other tech people outside your own little world. So this has been wonderful. I hope I get to cross paths with you in the future.
I completely agree. I would love to just be friends with you guys.
Yeah. So look up. I'm on Facebook.
Only if you sing to us.
Actually, I do think that we should start a new Facebook group with the entrance admin. You have to sing in order to get into it. Because that's the audio. Otherwise, I mean, come on, I do think this brings up a good point that hopefully Samantha is helpful in wrapping, which is, Golden made a really good point just now, which is it's very easy if you're already in a church tech position or a church volunteer tech position to feel isolated and feel like very cut off and feel like the problems that you're facing and the challenges that you're facing are unique and no one else has ever solved them, and it gets very frustrating. And I would encourage anyone to, use social media as a tool to reach out, make connections. I have, through some very generic Facebook tech groups, reached out and made connections to church tech people based on the most tenuous of threads. It's like, oh, they live in Georgia too. And I'll just DM them and go, hey, I happen to notice that you live in Georgia and I live in Georgia. And have made some really, really good friends and had, some really great give and take relationships with some folks that maybe I've then met in person, maybe I didn't. But in this age of the Zoom world, like, we can have these kinds of connections and as well, because, so many of these things that we face are all this, we've all, like, I say something and all four of these other people nod because they've all been there. Golden says something and all four of the other people nod because we've all been there. It's we're all in this together. And I have deeply enjoyed this conversation because, aside from Samantha, I've not had a chance to really chat with any of these other folks, and this has been fantastic. But yes, community, relationship.
I would like to say on the social media groups, I just want to, reach out to all the other engineers. When people look for or are looking for answers, please don't be mean to the people that are looking for answers.
Yeah.
They're genuinely looking
Oh my
for
goodness.
answers.
Yes.
We need to be kind and be willing to share our information, our knowledge. It's not about belittling. I mean, there was a couple feeds that I've been a part of where the church just doesn't have a budget and they bought what they bought, and these people just ripped into them like, you should have bought this, you should have paid for this.
Yeah.
And it's like, they don't have, listen, that's not what they go to these communities for. They go to these communities so that we can help. And let's all try to be a help rather than, trying to tear each other down and we're all here in this together. We're all experiencing this together.
Absolutely.
Let's make this happen as an amazing community.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, absolutely. And there's tons of resources. I will say this, so many resources available. Just like I was taught when the internet first came out, you can't believe everything that everybody tells you. And that's more true now than ever, in that you can't, it's great that we've got so much access, but also don't just read one thing and just say, okay, well, I've learned it all and then move on. It's one thing to get like quick answers because you're like troubleshooting something, but it's another if it's like an approach or you've got time, read 2 or 3 things or talk to 2 or 3 different people to get different points of view, because just because somebody has a YouTube channel doesn't mean that they know everything and everything they're saying is correct. So I will say that. But other than that, I truly appreciate your guys' time. I said this, I think, before we went live, but I think you guys are all fantastic human beings, and you guys would really genuinely be friends outside of this Zoom call. And I'm really glad that you guys all got to be introduced, and I hope that we can continue this friendship onward.
Yeah. Thank you, Samantha.
Let's do it.
Thank you for putting us all together. This has been
Thanks,
awesome.
Sam, the queen of audio.
Is the
Empress of audio.
Empress audio. Yeah, exactly.
Empress. I'm
Get it
sorry.
right.
I didn't mean to demote you.
Thank you guys. Thanks for everybody listening, for watching, everybody who tuned in and asked questions. We greatly appreciate you, and thank you, Golden, Brian, Isaac, Becky. I love you guys. Thank you very much. And I hope you have a fantastic rest of your Saturday.